You've just bought a brand new deck to you and it's muffled. Let's see if we can sort it out. You'll be very aware that if you go into Facebook and ask a question like, why is my deck playing muffled? I've just got it and I don't know what to do about it. Then you will get various answers. The first one you will probably get is, you've got to check the azimuth. And then they'll tell you to get a screwdriver and to give it a fiddle, which is not the way to do it. The next answer you will get is, it needs to have all the caps changed. And then you'll get various other variations on that, talking about cleaning the heads and all the rest of it. Now, the only one of that that's worth anything is the cleaning the heads. But I'm assuming you've already done that because you've got the deck and it's nice and clean and you've checked that and you've got a tape that you know is good. So you're going to try and play that back. Well, this is the problem here. If you do what they've just said, you will end up with a deck that is no good anymore. Well, no, I won't say no good. It's going to be wrong. It may not ever be correct again. By the end of this video, you will know how to decide whether there is a problem with your azimuth and what to do about it before you F it up. Because once it's gone, it's gone. Adjusting the azimuth is like breaking an egg. You can't undo what you've done. So let's get into it. So your deck sounds pants, but by the end of this video, you'll know what to do about it or whether it's really a problem. It doesn't matter whether you've got one of these, or 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 one of these. They've all got something in common. Even this has. It really doesn't matter who makes a cassette deck or any tape player. It always works the same way. Depending on your point of view, this is either the hero or the villain of the piece. This is a tape head. Right, I'm going to take you through this step by step. So we start off with, this is what you've probably got the sound of, and then we'll see what importance that is and what to do about it. So that sounded really nice. Now this is what it probably sounds like if your azimuth is out. This is what muddy sounds like. Trouble is, that's also what dirty heads, bad capacitors, misaligned tape path, and various other things also sound like. So you haven't actually learned anything just by playing it. What you've found out is that you've got a problem on your cassette deck. But if you do what they say and start altering the azimuth, you'll find there's actually a coloured varnish on the screw that you have to adjust. And if that hasn't been broken, if that seal is still there, that means that your azimuth is probably correct. And as soon as you break that seal, you've got a problem. So how can we make sure that we've not got a problem before we break the seal? In all of those decks, if you look where the heads are, where the tape actually slots in, you will find something that looks like this. On the right hand side, you can see there is a head there. That's the erase head. You leave that alone. And on the middle there, you can see that's the record playback head. And you can see the seal on the screw I was talking about. If the seal is intact like that one is, leave it alone. It is sealed for a reason. And the important word here is sealed. Do not break the seal. I want to give you a very short, simple version of what azimuth is, so bear with. What you're looking at here is the size of the head and a cassette tape, and see how that head goes in that gap. When it's in the deck, it looks more like this, so it's straight on. But the trouble with that is you can't actually see anything to adjust anything. If you look on here, you can see that the heads are one's at an angle, and the angle is shown on the tape above. The fact is that they will actually work, and they will both record a good signal, and they will both play it back 100%, but only the tape that it recorded. You can't swap them over because there's an error, and that is the azimuth. Azimuth is the angle of the head relative to the tape. When you play back a recording, the angle must be the same as when that recording was made. Otherwise, the recording will sound like muddy, dull, lacking in treble, muffled. Well, we've heard what that sounds like. Do you see where we're going now? That is how the question is answered. If the tape you recorded plays with good sound, but the proper copy of a music cassette still plays badly, it means the azimuth is not set correctly, or there is something wrong with the tape you are testing it with. So get yourself a different music cassette and try that. Tapes can be stiff or dry or shedding, making the heads dirty. They can be creased if the tape you recorded is running true and not getting damaged, and the tested tapes are consistently bad. Now you can adjust the azimuth. You need to know a little bit more before you go and do that. So I have a couple of videos showing how to do the azimuth, but what if the sound of the recording was still muffled? That means do not adjust the azimuth. This puts us into a good news and bad news situation. The good news is that the azimuth is fine. No problem so far. The bad news is you have a fault that may be caps or almost anything. The pinch rollers may be bad, but it is not the azimuth. Do not adjust the screw. If you do, you now have another problem. Your azimuth will be wrong. The beauty of it not being the azimuth problem is that you don't have to try and set it up. To do azimuth properly, you have to use oscilloscopes and test tapes and all sorts of things. And if you haven't got them, then, well, you can get an approximation of it, but it's not very good. And if you do end up doing azimuth adjustments or anything like that, don't use your ears, use a phone. Because if you actually listen to music long enough, it all sounds right anyway. It's an opinion, maybe you don't agree. Anyway, if you found any good way of doing that, maybe you'd like to put some comment. Maybe now would be a good time to do a subscribe. What I'm going to say now is do the proper diligence on your transport, because the probability is still, I mean, it could be the caps, but it's not very likely. If you are capable of changing the caps, or maybe you want to, but be aware that once you start getting into the electronics, you're talking about a big job. We're talking about hundreds of parts in there. Or if you change the capacitor, then you have to alter the coil that goes with it. By and large, that's the way it goes. There's always a coil and a capacitor because we're talking tuned circuits, which means that a job that would normally, you just take out a capacitor, a couple of minutes, but you've got to actually realign the circuitry afterwards, and it's not going to be easy. If you're not up to it, then you're going to have to get a tech involved. So at this point, maybe the best idea is to check your transport, clean your pinch rollers, make sure they're all working properly, and change the belts. You can probably do that yourself, not necessarily a problem, although some decks it can be. If you've got the whole thing working properly like that and it's pulling the tape through properly and it's still muffled when it does its own recordings, then you've got a problem which you've got to get sorted. Maybe it's time to put it on eBay and do it as a parts it's not working deck. I personally don't think it's worth spending the time on these old decks unless there's something like a Dragon. They are very good, and if you start getting involved with that sort of stuff, then you're going to be spending some money on the parts and things. The biggest problem with old cassette decks is trying to find the parts. The other problem is that the parts that you've got may or may not work when you get them because they are old. So if you get an original part, has the original part, because it's been sat in a box, survived any better than the part that was in the deck? It's one of those problems that you have to look at. The whole thing about vintage cassette decks is they are wonderful. They give superb performance if you've got one that's set up properly and if you know what you're doing. The main thing about azimuth is if you've got two decks and one of them is set correctly because nobody's fiddled with it and it works fine, and the other one isn't quite right, it will never play the tapes from the first one very well. If you start fiddling with azimuth, you're in the situation where how do you get it back to what was right? Because without the proper tapes and appropriate technical knowledge, service manuals, oscilloscopes and all of that sort of thing, you're never going to be able to get it right. What you can do is if you go and watch the video that is there, you can actually learn how to do it by trial and error. I would say it's a way of getting a deck to work that wasn't working before and get you some use out of it. If you do have two decks, use a tape from your other deck to set the azimuth on the deck you're fiddling with, because that way at least they'll match. Maybe you can get something out of this video. If you did, boot the like button, smack in the subscribe, and I'll see you another time. Any questions on this, any queries, whatever you like, just put it in the comments. Catch you another time. Bye-bye. Remember, when it comes to azimuth, don't break the seal until you know what you're doing. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.